Friends in Jesus Christ, peace be with you. This is a reflection for the 20th Sunday of Ordinary Time. The readings are taken from the prophet Jeremiah and from the letter to the Hebrews and the Gospel from Luke. Unfortunately, many of us have a very limited knowledge of the Old Testament. For many of us, it's like a closed book. And this is sad because the Old Testament foreshadows the New and prepares us to understand the New Testament. Because the great themes that are played out in the life of Jesus and indeed of the early church are already played in the Old Testament. And this is particularly true of today's readings. The first reading is from Jeremiah. And to understand this reading, we must be clear about some historical facts. Jeremiah lived in Jerusalem. He was a priest. And he lived 600 years before Christ. This was a very critical period for the Jews because the Babylonians had become the superpower of the region, and they were systematically overthrowing the smaller realms, and they had come to Jerusalem. They had laid siege to Jerusalem, and that siege had gone on for months. Jerusalem was surrounded by the Babylonian army, and they did not allow anyone to go in or to come out. And there became a great famine in Jerusalem. As we hear in the first reading, there is no bread left in the city. And Jeremiah, being the prophet of God, interprets the situation. And he tells everyone, the king and the leaders and the people, that this situation of the Babylonians sieging the city is because they have abandoned the covenant made on Mount Sinai, where God said, "You are my people, and I am your God. If you listen to my words and obey me, then I will be your God." The people had said, "Yes, we will," but they never did. And as years went on, they grew further and further away from the covenant, doing their own thing, worshipping the local gods. And so Jeremiah said, "There is now no hope. The only hope for you is to surrender to the Babylonians, and then you will live. But if you fight, you will be destroyed, and Jerusalem will be destroyed, and the temple will be destroyed." And that is why in the readings, the officials say to the king, "This man must be put to death because he is weakening the soldiers and all the people in their opposition to the Babylonians." Let us listen to the readings of today. A reading from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 38. In those days, the officials said to the king, "Let this man Jeremiah be put to death, for he is weakening the hands of the soldiers who are left in this city and the hands of all the people by speaking such words to them. For this man is not seeking the welfare of this people, but their harm." King Zedekiah said, "Behold, he is in your hands, for the king can do nothing against you." So they took Jeremiah and cast him into the cistern of Malchiah the king's son, which was in the court of the guard, letting Jeremiah down by ropes. And there was no water in the cistern, but only mud. And Jeremiah sank in the mud. Abimelech went from the king's house and said to the king, "My lord the king, these men have done evil in all that they did to Jeremiah the prophet by casting him into the cistern, and he will die there of hunger, for there is no bread left in the city." Then the king commanded Abimelech, the Ethiopian, "Take 30 men with you from here, and lift Jeremiah the prophet out of the cistern before he dies." The word of the Lord. A reading from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 12. Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. The word of the Lord. A reading from the Gospel according to Luke chapter 12. Jesus said to his disciples, "I came to cast a fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law." The Gospel of the Lord. In the readings we have just heard, in the first reading, Jeremiah has told the people that there is no hope except in surrender, and that the Babylonians will destroy Jerusalem and destroy the wonder of the world, which is Solomon's temple, and take all the people into exile. And so they want to kill Jeremiah. They throw him into the cistern. But there are some good people in Jerusalem also, people who actually believe what Jeremiah has said. One of them is the king himself, Zedekiah. But he is a weak king, and he hesitates. He listens to Jeremiah, but he hasn't the courage to do what Jeremiah tells him. And so he says to the leaders, "Well, he is in your hands, and I can't do anything against you." And so they took Jeremiah, as we heard, and they threw him into this cistern. There was no water there, but only mud, and Jeremiah sinks into the mud. But then Abimelech, he goes to the king, and he says, "They have done evil against him. You must save him. Otherwise, Jeremiah will die. There's no bread in the city." And the king, who actually secretly believes what Jeremiah is saying, but hasn't the courage to do what he says to this Ethiopian, "Take 30 men from here and rescue Jeremiah." And so he does. Now, why are we listening to this passage from Jeremiah? Because Jeremiah is a kind of, he is like Jesus. He is a type of Jesus. 600 years later in the same city, which by this time has been rebuilt, and there is a new temple. The Babylonians did destroy everything, but by God's mercy, the Jews came back to Jerusalem and they rebuilt the city and the temple. 600 years later, Jesus is in the same city of Jerusalem, and he is preaching to the leaders of his day in the temple. And they do not accept him as their forefathers did not accept Jeremiah. They will not believe Jesus as their forefathers would not believe Jeremiah. And the chief priest, Caiaphas, will say, "It is better for this man to die than for the Romans to come and destroy our nation." Almost the same words that they said against Jeremiah. But Jesus stands up for the truth. He is the witness to the truth. To Pilate, he will say, "I came to bear witness to the truth." And because he speaks the truth, and he speaks the words of his Father, and he does the works of his Father, despite the opposition of the Jews, he is crucified. But listen to the second reading. How could Jesus suffer the passion and death on the cross? He was a human being, just like you and me. Let us never forget that. The Word of God tells us he was like us in all things except sin. That although he was God, he emptied himself and took the nature of a slave and was born as a mere human being. And he is the founder and he is the leader in our faith. And what was his faith? His faith was in his Father, in his Father's fidelity. He was living and now going to die for his Father, for his Father's word, and to do his Father's will. And he knew that his Father would not disappoint him, that his Father would give him back his life if he poured it out for him. And that is how Jesus rose from the dead. It was his Father who raised that dead body in the tomb, raising Jesus, the man who died on the cross, with the glory of God in his body. And as the letter to the Hebrews tells us, he is now seated at the right hand of the Father. So he, for the joy that was before him, he was able to suffer the cross and the shame and ignominy and the jeering crowd of enemies, because he knew that his Father would reward him infinitely. And this brings us to ourselves, for we are the followers of Jeremiah in the Old Testament and supremely of Jesus in the New Testament. We, through our baptism, have become the children of God, and we call God Father, just as Jesus called him Father. Jesus said, I am going to my Father and your Father. And we have the same relationship with God that Jesus, the Son of God, had. And we, with him and in him and through him, call God Father, loving Father. And we, in this world which opposes God, we must follow in the path that Jesus walked. It is no longer, at least in many countries, violent in its opposition. But the opposition is still there in many ways. Many of us, many Christians, are marginalized, held in suspicion, and there are ethical conflicts. The world's view of sexuality and marriage, of euthanasia, abortion, these are all against the will and the plan and the law of God our Father. And we as his children and the brothers and sisters and disciples of Jesus, we have to stand up against them. But let us, like Jesus, run with endurance in the race that is before us, looking at Jesus, who endured the cross because he saw the joy of the future. And we also must keep our eyes on the joy that lies ahead. Jesus is now seated at the right hand of the Father, and we too will sit on his own throne. And so in the gospel, Jesus tells us, don't think that I have come to bring peace. He does bring peace to our hearts, but in the world he brings division. For those who follow him, for those who put their faith in him, they follow the Father's will, and they stand up against the world which is under the influence of the prince of this world, Satan. And Satan brings destruction. Where Satan is, there is no peace. There is war, and there are conflicts. And Satan inspires the world, and so the world is in the situation in which we see and hear day by day. But we are the children of God, and we must, like Jesus, bear witness by our lives to the truth, at whatever cost, looking ahead to the joy. And the joy we cannot imagine now. For St. Paul tells us, quoting the prophet Isaiah, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man to even conceive what things God has prepared for those who love him. And may God bless you.